Last episode, we worked on expanding the base by building a detailed medieval barn while also constructing a fully automated iron, clay and andesite factory designed to fit entirely inside one aesthetic industrial building. It's honestly kind of crazy to think that after only 2 episodes, the world has already changed this much. We've gone from a completely empty area to a fully developing medieval Create base, and I'm really thankful that so many of you have been enjoying the progression so far. This is the current progress of the world so far. I'm really happy with how everything is starting to connect together, but the terrain below the castle still needs a lot of terraforming and detailing before it looks fully natural. So the plan for today, and I already hinted at this in the last episode, is that we're finally preparing to go to the moon. But before that, I want to build something huge on top of this mountain. Since Astral lets you build rockets and travel to other planets later in the mod pack, I want this place to become the main building for all the space progression. And I also have a really cool create feature planned for the roof, but I'll keep that part as a surprise for now. And since this build is gonna be huge, I really don't want to use the motion capture mod for the time lapses again, so I'm planning to use a schematic cannon instead to make the building process way easier. Basically, I build everything first in a creative copy of the world, save it as a schematic, then load it into my survival world and give the cannon all the required blocks. But the cannon also needs fuel to work, and that fuel is gunpowder. Thankfully, in this mod pack, gunpowder is actually easy to automate by crushing dried kelp. So the first thing we're gonna build is a kelp farm. So with all that said, enjoy the video. So the way this works is actually pretty interesting. Crushing dried kelp gives around a 25% chance of producing gunpowder, which basically means that, on average, every 4 pieces of kelp processed should give at least 1 gunpowder. So because of that, we're gonna need an automatic kelp farm and a smelting station with campfires to dry all the kelp. And I decided this will be the perfect spot for it. I want the entire farm to be hidden underneath a fisherman's hut where all the items will go. But before getting into all of that, I first wanted to show you how much the factory from the previous episode has already been producing in the background. So far, everything is looking really good. I modified the iron farm a little bit to improve the efficiency, and it definitely paid off. The andesite and clay production are also doing great. So yeah, I'm definitely calling this a success. Now it was time to prepare all the materials needed for the kelp farm. So the process is actually pretty simple. First, you set up the area where the kelp is going to grow and be harvested. After that, you place down a mechanical bearing, attach mechanical harvesters onto the rotating structure, and just like that, you've got yourself an automatic kelp farm. While gathering materials for the project, I eventually ran out of andesite alloy, so I decided it was the perfect opportunity to finally make proper use of the factory we built in the previous episode and produce a fresh batch automatically. And while waiting, I decorated the back of the house a little bit by placing wheat around the area. And I may have also aggressively expanded the animal population a little bit. After that, most of the work mainly consisted of crafting and preparing all the remaining materials required for the project. I started by expanding the river floor, and honestly, working underwater gave me a hard time. So after nearly drowning and taking damage every 5 seconds, this is what the final result looks like. A surprising amount of suffering for something that honestly doesn't even look that massive. And I also took some time to fill the holes in the terrain with dirt to make the area flatter for the build. If you've been asking yourself why this tree has just been standing here untouched the entire time, it's because it's apparently alive for some reason. I honestly don't know why, but it kind of feels like some forgotten guardian of the forest, even though there's literally no forest left around it anymore. But it kept pushing me back every time, so I just left him alone. Yeah, that's what I thought. Know your place. After apparently settling my differences with the tree over a nice cup of coffee, the final thing left to craft was a portable storage interface, which is basically what allows the rotating farm to transfer all of its items directly into a chest. And since I wanted the farm to be underground, I had to dig a massive hole for it, so that's what I did. And after clearing out the entire underground area, the rest of the work mostly consisted of trying to plan out how the whole setup was actually going to function and connect together properly. So this is the overall result of the setup. The first section of the system is dedicated to drying the kelp using campfires powered by encased fans, allowing the entire process to happen automatically. Once the kelp has been fully dried, it then gets transported into the crushing system where it's processed into gunpowder. Overall, it's actually a pretty simple farm once everything is connected together. Now the only things left to do were powering the system and decorating the place. Wow, this looks incredible. Since it's underground, I wanted to give the place a mossy vibe. The last thing left was making a path to the building where all the gunpowder is gonna be stored, but first I still needed to build it. And with the system running, it produced a decent amount of gunpowder, so I decided to craft the schematic cannon and test it out. At least the crafting recipe wasn't that complicated. The only expensive materials was iron, but since I already have a fully automatic iron factory, it made the crafting way less challenging. So after crafting the cannon, the only remaining things I still needed were a schematic table to load the building and of course the schematic itself. Inside the schematic table, all I had to do was load the build that I spent nearly 2 hours designing beforehand and position it exactly where I wanted it to be placed in the world. Of course, the schematic cannon can't magically create blocks out of nowhere, which meant I still needed to gather every single material required for the structure manually, so because of that, I ended up spending another 2 hours collecting all the necessary blocks for the build. While gathering the last materials, I realized I couldn't make some of the blocks because I'm still too early in the mod pack, and for others I just didn't have enough resources, so I'm just gonna add those blocks later. But now, it's finally time to test this cannon. Okay, this build already looks amazing. Some areas still look a bit off because of the missing blocks I couldn't craft yet, but once I go back later and replace everything properly, the final result is going to look so much better. The final detail I wanted to add was some water wheels by the river to give the place more movement. And just like that, we now have a fully functional fisherman's hut capable of automatically producing gunpowder in the background. I just needed to connect the farm to the build and decorate the interior a little bit before it was completely done. So this is the final result for now. I still needed to work on some of the decoration, but I already felt like the whole build came together really nicely. And thankfully, the farm was producing a really decent amount of gunpowder consistently. which meant the entire setup was working exactly the way I wanted. So basically, the farm makes the gunpowder underground. Then it gets transferred into chutes and pushed upward by fans. So after decorating a little bit, this is what I came up with. I'm still not fully sure about the design though, so we'll probably change it later. From afar though, the entire build was looking really nice. And after that, I worked on building a proper pathways leading toward the farm, along with a small bridge to make traveling around the area a lot easier. So with all of that done, it was finally time to work on the main goal of the episode, building the space station. And spoiler alert, it was a mess. So basically, instead of just building the structure in creative, I also terraformed the entire mountain in the schematic. That meant I needed a massive amount of dirt and grass blocks. And since I didn't have silk touch yet, I had to get a bit creative. Thankfully, the mod pack lets us make grass block using a spout and water. But before I could craft the spout, I first needed to make copper casings, since the spout is part of the quest progression. And creating those casings required going through a small production process involving rubber and copper sheets. To keep everything compact and out of sight, I decided to build the entire production setup underneath my house. At that point, the only remaining step was making the copper casings. And with that finished, we finally unlocked and crafted the spout, which meant we could move on to the next part of the project. To keep everything centralized, I once again used the space underneath my house and built an infinite water pumping setup capable of providing a constant supply of water. And just like that, we only needed to feed the machine with dirt and it would automatically produce grass blocks. Just a quick announcement before we continue. Whenever I'm gathering materials for large projects like these, I usually do that part live on stream. So if you ever want to hang out, chat for a bit, or watch the progress happen in real time, make sure to keep an eye out for my streams. So after spending quite a bit of time gathering all the required materials, we finally had everything we needed to move on to the actual construction phase. So after nearly 3 hours of building, this was the final result. And that was only one section of the entire structure. This is where the portal is eventually going to be located. But after realizing how much time it took just to complete one single side of the build, I came up with an idea. But before that, I needed a new set of armor because my copper armor was about to break. So I made a new one out of iron. So my idea was pretty simple. Instead of relying on a single schematic cannon to do all the work, I will build 3 additional ones so each section of the structure could be constructed at the same time. So after taking care of all the material gathering during a live stream, I finally had everything required to start the construction. But before we get into that, I wanted to give a quick shout out to my new friend Mark Redai, who stayed throughout the entire stream. We spent hours talking while I was gathering resources, and it honestly made the whole process a lot more enjoyable. So once again, shout out to him for keeping me company during the grind, and now it's finally time to get this build finished. We finally did it, guys. This build took me a whole week to finish and the result is amazing. So if you're wondering where I got the inspiration from, I asked ChatGPT to create an overworld space station with a medieval style, and this is what it gave me. I think the final build ended up pretty close to the image. So this area is going to serve as the station's laboratory, when I'll be crafting and assembling all the important components needed for the future progression. And if we head up here, this section is going to become the main hangar where all my future rockets will be stored. The best part is that the roof above is eventually going to open up, allowing the rockets to launch directly from the station. And over here is where the portal is eventually going to be installed. I'm still going to make a few additional blocks and decorative details so the portal fits naturally within the space and feels like it was always meant to be here. And over here, we have a perfect viewing spot overlooking everything we've built in the world so far. And from a distance, the entire build was looking absolutely incredible. Now that the station is built, it's time to work on the quest. What I want in my laboratory is a bunch of automated systems so crafting items with multiple processing steps becomes much easier. So the first thing I wanted to work on was copper casings. The way this works is pretty simple. I put the andesite casings onto the belt and the machine handles the rest. Since the casings needs to be processed 3 times, I made the loop system using a brass funnels on the other side of the item bolt. The funnel is filtered to reject copper casings, so any unfinished items get sent back through the machine until they finally become copper casings. The next production line I wanted to set up was for rose gold, because I'm going to need a lot of it moving forward, especially for crafting electron tubes, which are an important part of the quest progression. To automate the process, I first needed to build a seared melter capable of liquefying both copper and gold. Once melted, the fluids will be transferred into a mechanical mixer where they will be combined into rose gold before being sent into a fluid tank for storage and future use. So this is the design I came up with. It's pretty compact and really easy to use. The next thing I needed to automate was redstone chips, and this one was a bit more complicated. The loop system was easy since I just reused the same design as the copper casings, but the crafting process itself requires a lot more steps and also needs a spout filled with molten copper. But before moving on to the next machine, I decided to spend some time detailing the area and giving it the atmosphere of an old underground factory hidden beneath the station. And I think it looks really good. The ceiling is a bit empty for now, but I have a few ideas for it. So this is what I came up with for the redstone chip system. Like I said, the copper gets melted down and sent into the spout. And after that, the rest of the machine handles everything automatically. So now I think our laboratory is complete. I just need to power everything up and we'll be ready to go. And there you go, everything is running at a decent speed. I even added a little workstation in the middle to make it easier to craft whatever I need. So now it was time to test this out. I started with the copper casings, and everything worked perfectly. After that, I moved on to the rose gold production line and used it to make an electron tube. Now for the redstone chip. I still needed an item we had never made before, copper wire, which is produced using a rolling mill. Now I had access to redstone chips, which are going to be useful for a lot of crafts moving forward. As a reward, the quest gave me the schematic for the respirator, which will be used to supply oxygen to my spacesuit. To build it, I needed all of those items, and it practically used up all of my copper, so I'm definitely going to need a copper farm pretty soon. While I was busy figuring everything out, I also spent some time working on the ceiling and ended up covering it with moss. It already looks a lot better, but I think adding some glowberries later on will really help bring the whole area to life. So even though I still had a decent amount of copper stored back at home, I decided to go mining anyway. While I was at it, I figured I might as well start searching for a shimmer lake, since finding one is part of the final quest chain before we can make our journey to the moon. After finding one not too far from our main cave, I have to admit, it looked beautiful. The colors were really nice to look at. So while I was there, I started mining some moonstone. After that, I placed down a setup so we could make our shimmer blocks directly from the lake. I just needed a hose pulley to take the fluid and put it into a tank. Then I just needed to put the moonstone into the basin and let the magic happen. Basically, these are the blocks we're going to use for the portal, so I'm going to need quite a few of them. After getting back home, I quickly made my way to the space station and built the portal frame. With that done, the next step was crafting the Astral conduit, which is used to activate the portal. So now that the portal is finished, this episode is finally coming to an end. It was honestly a mess putting all of this together, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps support me and the series. To make the Astral conduit, I needed all of these items. The most expensive part of the recipe was definitely the block of diamonds, and I only had one diamond, so I had no choice but to bring out the tunnel bore and start searching for more diamonds. What I wasn't expecting was how hard it would be to find diamonds. It took me almost an hour of digging before I found any. So the solution to my problem was building a bigger tunnel bore. And while I was testing out, I finally found some diamonds hiding in the dark. But I still needed a lot more, so I let the tunnel bore run for a while. So after digging a massive hole, I finally found enough diamonds to craft the block. After that, I headed back home and made the Astral conduit. Now, the only two steps remaining were making the respirator and crafting the spacesuit. But before that, I wanted to quickly activate the portal. Getting all the required materials together and crafting every component took longer than I expected, but the respirator was finally complete. Now the only remaining step was supplying it with an infinite source of water so it could continuously produce oxygen and prepare the spacesuit for what comes next. But the respirator wasn't enough. I still needed a way to put oxygen into the spacesuit, and that's done using an oxygen loader, which has a pretty challenging recipe. In order to craft the fan, I first had to make sturdy sheets, which meant getting my hands on a lot of obsidian. Thankfully, instead of spending hours mining it manually, I knew a much more efficient way to gather it. So I built this lava farm, and I'm going to use it to make obsidian. Through this mechanical pipe, the lava is transported directly out of the tank and into the next stage of the system. After that, you need to place a car assembler below where the lava is going to come from. Then, place a glass block on the card assembler and put a water source above it so the lava turns into obsidian. Now you just need to activate the card assembler, and there you go, free obsidian. Basically, when I activate the card assembler, the glass block becomes part of a contraption instead of acting like a normal block. That leaves room for the obsidian to form. When I deactivate the assembler, the glass becomes a normal block again and breaks the obsidian. So now, to make sturdy sheets, I first needed to crush the obsidian into dust. Then, I needed to press it 10 times. And there you go, now we've got our hands on some sturdy sheets. At that point, most of the hard work was done. The only remaining components were the fan, the fluid pipe, which had a surprisingly strange recipe, the oxygen tank, and once those were finished, I could finally craft the oxygen loader. Now we just need to pump water into the respirator and convert it into oxygen using the oxygen loader. The final step was making the spacesuit. So I started with the pants, then the chest piece, which needed a copper tank, and after that the helmet. Somehow though, I forgot to record the boots. Now we just need to fill the spacesuit with oxygen and we'll be ready to go to the moon. With everything finally ready, there's no reason to wait any longer. Let's get started. There you go guys, we actually did it. Reaching the moon wasn't easy. But now that it's finally unlocked, an entirely new side of the mod pack is available to us. New mechanics, new resources, and a lot of exciting projects are waiting ahead. But we'll leave all of that for the next episode. And with that, we've reached the end of another episode. This project took countless hours of planning, building, crafting, and problem solving, but seeing everything come together made it completely worth it. I had an amazing time working on it, and I hope you enjoyed every step of the journey. If you did, leaving a like is a great way to support the channel, and if you're new here, consider subscribing to join us for what's coming next. Thank you for being part of the adventure, and until next time, take care. Bye guys.